Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Reexamining Justice, How Restorative Principles Can End the Death Penalty in Kansas. We are so very glad that you can join us. The format for this webinar will be brief introductions of our panelists, followed by their presentations. After they speak, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. This webinar is being recorded, and it will ultimately be posted on the Kansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty Facebook page, in case you would like to view part of it again, or you have friends who missed it and would like to view it. Since this event is in webinar format, you will need to put your questions in the chat. I will be watching for them as the presentations ensue, and we will relay them to the panelists during the Q&A session. And just a reminder that you will only see the panelists and the moderator, and you won't see our many registrants who are attending tonight. Our first speaker is Todd Lehman. Todd is the Executive Director of Offender Victim Ministries Justice Services, which is a Newton-based nonprofit, and they offer restorative services to persons who have been impacted by conflict, trauma, crime, and/or incarceration in their local communities. He is an ordained minister in the Mennonite Church. He has a bachelor's degree from Eastern Mennonite University and a master's from Friends University. His hope for the work of Offender Victim Ministries is that they will create healthier communities in South Central Kansas, where individuals who have experienced harm contribute to decisions and outcomes that lead toward healing, and that any who caused harm might have an opportunity to take responsibility for their actions and to work toward repairing the harm they have caused. Celeste Dixon, our second presenter, is a park ranger at Fort Larned National Historic Site. In 1986, while in the U.S. Navy and serving our country stationed in Puerto Rico, she got that fateful call that her mother was murdered in a home invasion in Hockley, Texas, which is a small town in the Houston area. Over the course of the legal process that followed over many years, Celeste learned much about how the death penalty impacts the families and loved ones of those who are murdered. And she is here tonight to tell her story and share her insights. Todd, take it away.
Thank you, Donna. It's good to be with you, and I thank you for those of you who are tuning in this evening. So first of all, I want to talk about restorative justice, but there's also, if you are familiar with restorative justice at all, you may also have a familiarity with transformative justice. And so I want to just address those two terms. I view them as being very similar and really not worth dividing our community over. I know that there are other practitioners and even some educators in the field who have a similar understanding of this as I do. So as I think about transformative justice, restorative justice, my metaphor for arguing over those two terms, or the differences, minute as they are, about them is kind of like this. Imagine two people who are very high on Ford as the brand of vehicle. They walk into a gathering of Chevy enthusiasts, and then they proceed to argue with each other about which is better, the 2004 Ford Mustang or the 2005 Ford Mustang. So to me, it's sort of a let's remain united. We have the same goals in mind, restorative justice versus transformative justice. This evening, I will just simply I will use the word restorative justice for the sake of simplicity. So I want to start with a quote here. And this quote is attributed to Brian Stevenson. He says, "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." Now, if that might be true, then we need an approach to addressing harms that are committed that recognizes that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. So, restorative justice seeks to address a basic set of questions. One question, who has been harmed? Two, what are their needs? Three, whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And then four, how can the harm be made as right as possible? So the four basic questions of restorative justice. And if you are new to this concept this evening and you're interested in doing some reading or looking for some additional resources, two possibilities that I have with me are the Little Book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zehr. And these are thin, meant to be easily digestible. The Little Book of Restorative Justice for People in Prison by Barb Taves. Apologies if you can hear the dog in the background. And then if you're looking to go a little deeper into the topic, Howard Zehr, his kind of seminal work is Changing Lenses. I don't have a copy of that to show you this evening, but that's a really great book. Still a fairly easy read, but it goes a little more into detail. So restorative justice is a philosophical approach that can utilize various processes to accomplish its goal. Restorative justice is a partner to the U.S. justice system or other justice systems, but in our context, the U.S. justice system. Some things about what restorative justice is. It is voluntary. It requires taking ownership of one's actions. It requires listening. It requires careful attention to power dynamics. It requires making space for others to speak as open, honest, candid, as is comfortable. And restorative justice is centered on the one who is harmed. A few things restorative justice is not. It is not about assigning guilt. It is not about finding fault. Restorative justice is not about punishment. So again, the questions, these are basic and super important. The questions that restorative justice seeks to address. Who has been harmed? What are their needs? Whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And how can that harm be made as right as possible? So how is restorative justice different than the U.S. justice system? Well, then we start to look at what are the questions that the justice system asks. And those questions come in the forms like this. What laws have been broken? And in that question, it's the one who was offended in that question is the state. Second question that our justice system asks, who did it? So the goal for the trial is to prove an individual didn't offend the state, or to convict that an individual did offend the state by breaking a law. And so that work, of course, entails looking for reasons that the law was not offended. And the third question, if found guilty, what does the individual deserve? So what can the guilty one, in this case, give to the state? And often that's the form of time or money, or in some cases, their own life. So in comparing these two systems, as I've kind of set this up, the restorative justice system, the current U.S. justice system, what is different? In our U.S. justice system, the system is set up to keep the offender and the victim apart. And certainly, if they're in the same space, to keep them from talking with each other. The system doesn't take into consideration the needs of the one who was harmed. The system, U.S. justice system, doesn't look for the best way forward for all parties. So, what's missing in our current justice system? For one, answers. Answers for the one who was harmed. Often a super important part for someone who has been harmed to kind of make sense, to begin making sense of what took place, is to be able to ask the question, why? Why did this happen? Why did you do this? Why did it happen to me? Why did you choose me? Did you choose me, or was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? What were you thinking when you did the thing? An opportunity for the one harmed to find out from the one who did cause the harm, are you sorry for what you've done to me or to my family? Or are you sorry for what you've done to this, maybe even to our community? But that's missing in our current system. And so getting some of those questions, having an opportunity to have some of those questions answered, ultimately what's missing in our system is an opportunity for closure. Closure that allows an individual harmed to move forward in as healthy a way as possible. But there's more missing. For the one who caused the harm, they're missing an opportunity to make it right. And they may not be able to undo what they did, but with the help of the one who is victimized, some creative solutions can sometimes be found to make it right. And another thing that's missing in our system is creativity in addressing both the harms that were committed and the resulting needs that the one harmed has. Another thing missing is the voice of the one who caused the harm, and the voice of the community in which the harm took place. So those two voices, who caused the harm and the community where it took place, their voice is in the process of moving forward, of addressing the harms, of figuring out what is needed by all who are involved and impacted. Those voices are missing in our current process, in our current system. So how could restorative justice be employed as a tool in death penalty cases? Well, first of all, it can't. If a person's life, if the person who committed the harm, if that life has been taken, we're done at that point. And I also want to note that restorative justice may not be for every single case, but many cases can be utilized. It can provide closure for those who were harmed, even in the case of murder. That's a super important area in which closure is so vital, so important. It can provide opportunity to make things as right as possible for the one who caused the harm, which can lead to a sense of having made a positive contribution to the world, or at least to the local community where that took place. And so in that way, restorative justice, when utilized, can give opportunity to restore dignity for the one who at this point has had everything taken away from them. We're going to hear a story here shortly from Celeste, but if you're curious about stories of restorative justice in action being utilized in cases where murder was involved, with the internet, we can find so many things. And there's a story, I believe it's a TED Talk, of a pizza delivery incident, pizza delivery gone badly, and one young man murdered another young man. But the story picks up with the grandfather of the one and the dad of the other, and the journey that the two of them embarked upon in a restorative process. There's another video out there on the web comparing the stories of two teens, one in the US and one in New Zealand. And of course, the teen in the US was treated, both of these teens committed murder. Their situations were very similar. They both committed murder, and the one in the US, of course, was taken through the US judicial system, justice system. And you can probably imagine where that led. The individual in New Zealand was taken through a restorative justice system, which is much more common in New Zealand. And the place that he ended up is so vastly different from the place that the young man in the US ended up. And it illustrates really well what can happen when restorative justice is an option. So I think I'll stop there and hand it over to you, Celeste. And thank you, Celeste, for sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Todd. And so as my introduction mentioned, I was in the Navy, 1986. I was stationed in Puerto Rico, and I was living off base at the time. So when the message, when my mom was killed, my family had to send a Red Cross message so I could get emergency leave to come home. And I happened to work. I was in communications, so I happened to work at the base communication station. So my roommate off base was working that night when the message came in. So she called our house and she wanted to warn or just let our other roommate know what was going on, because they had to get the chaplain over to they wanted me to come in, and they were trying to get the chaplain and get some other stuff going on. And so anyway, when I got the word that I was supposed to go in, I was like, what do they want me for? I thought maybe I'd done something wrong at work, and I was like, can't they wait until the morning? I'm supposed to be at work. And finally, my friend Eileen had to tell me, because I was bound and determined to try and figure out a way to call the base. They had base operators that went off duty at midnight. And she finally said, okay, well, Celeste, there's something happened with your family, so you need to go in. And so it was about a 10-minute drive from where I was living to get on base and get to the communication station. And the whole time I kept thinking, okay, well, I sent a Red Cross message. It has to be someone in your immediate family. They wouldn't send it for like an aunt or an uncle or grandparents or anything like that. And I just ran through my parents, and I have 6 siblings, and I'm running through them all thinking, okay, who could I live without? Who would, what would impact me least, or how would I feel about, if I lost this person versus that person? And of all the ones that I ran through in my head that night, my mother was the one that I decided, it couldn't be her, because I just felt like that would be the end of the world. And of course, when I got there, I found out that's exactly what it was. They didn't know, the message didn't say what had happened. And so we had to go, there was only one phone in the building that could call off base. We had to go to a different workroom and call, and I got a hold of my sister, and she said, well, she's been murdered. And I thought, I didn't know what to say, because I don't think anybody who is the relative of someone who's been murdered really knew what to think at the time, because it's so I just feel like murder is something that happens to other people, and I was a big Agatha Christie fan, and so in my mind, murder wasn't committed by people breaking into your house. It was carefully planned in a country manor house. I just didn't, the whole idea of someone breaking into into our house, my parents' house, and shooting my mother was just, I just really couldn't comprehend it. But at any rate, I went home, and while I was home for 2 weeks, and we had the funeral and had family and friends in town, they actually caught the guy who committed the crime. And so we ended up having some consultation with the police. And also, just to clarify, although we lived in a really small town on the outskirts of Houston, we were actually just inside Harris County, which encompasses Houston. And Harris County at the time, and it may still be true, I'm not sure, but at the time, Harris County was it was a jurisdiction that sent, I think, most, if not the most, people to death row in the country. It's in Texas, and the district attorney at the time was really gung-ho about seeking the death penalty. But also, and this is not something I found out until much later, a lot of the decision to seek the death penalty depends less on, there is a racial bias, but it's less about the race of the perpetrator and more about the race of the victim. And so my mother was a white, middle-aged woman, and so it just, I don't think there was any question that they weren't going to seek the death penalty in this case. And at the time, I had never really thought about the death penalty. I kind of accepted it as, well, that seems fair enough. If you kill someone, you should be killed. I'm not saying I was strongly attached to it. It just seemed like it just made sense to me at the time. And and when we were talking to the prosecutor and the judge, and well, not the judge, but the prosecutor, maybe not the assistant district attorney. I'm sure it wasn't actually Johnny Holmes, who was the district attorney at the time, but they created this feeling, and this has to do with the way they described, our justice system is really, this adversarial justice system. It's us against them. And, when you're faced with something like this, or any crime really, you're hurting, you want someone to pin the blame on, and it's just human nature to want some sort of punishment. And they made us feel really, oh, we're going to get him, we're going to get him, the guy's just a monster, and we're gonna make sure we get justice for you. So it makes you feel good. I can't think of anyone who wouldn't, at least be like they're trying to look out for your interests. But there were several things that happened. So this was in August of 1986, and the trial didn't actually take place until the following August. And I had gotten out of the Navy in April and was back in Houston in my parents' house. Anyway, I attended the trial mainly because well, I wanted to be there. I wanted a family member to be there because 3 of my siblings were witnesses, and my dad was also a witness, so they couldn't attend. And I thought somebody from the family needed to be there. And you know, there were several things that happened. First, the defense attorneys brought out the fact that this man and his siblings had been abused by their father. In fact, his sister got on the stand and revealed some very personal things about what she had gone through growing up. In fact, I actually got up and left the courtroom because I just thought I don't need to listen to her. She's up there telling very personal things to try and save her brother, and I just felt like I didn't want to pry, if that makes any sense. So I started to see the differences between our families. We lived on, you know, we were white, we were middle class. My parents took us to national parks growing up, and, you know, camping, and had just a real normal childhood. And they didn't have that. So, you know, there's this little crack starting to show up about, well, maybe he's, you know, well, he still killed my mom, but maybe he's a human being after all, you know. I mean, because they try and paint it as, you know, really to hate someone, you have to dehumanize them. And so, and what I discovered along the way is to want the death penalty, to continue to support the death penalty, you have to, at least in my case, and I think it's true for a lot of other people, you have to maintain some hate against this person to want them to die. And so I then during the punishment phase, instead of the jury just deciding to give the death penalty, they had to answer 2 questions. One was the act intentional, and is this person a continuing threat to society? And I remember listening to the testimony. They established that it was intentional in the fact that when he left his house to go find some place to rob, he carried a gun with him. So he must have been intending to use it. But, you know, when they got to the part about is he a continuing threat to society, I remember from what I heard, it didn't seem to me like he was all that dangerous. I mean, he'd never done anything. He had been in and out of prison for robbery. He never had any, you know, violent crime in his past. And so I remember feeling worried during that phase of the trial that they weren't going to give him the death penalty, because at that point I was still felt like that's what we deserved. And but they did answer yes to both of those questions. And so the next thing that happened is that my sisters and I were standing in the lobby of the courtroom. We were going to go out to eat with the judge, and I don't want to say we were going to celebrate. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I missed something. I was in the hallway outside the courtroom, and we were relieved. My family and I, we felt like we had gotten the verdict that we deserved. And then I saw his mother standing in the hallway, because it's an odd situation, because we're both families are out in the hallway, and you sort of feel like you're, you know, 2 different teams trying to avoid eye contact and sit on your side of the bleachers. And so, but his mother, when the verdict came, I remember seeing his mother in the hallway, just literally sobbing. And it occurred to me at that time that while we had heard that the man who had killed our mother was going to die, she had heard that her son was going to die. And I don't know, that just really affected me. I went over and I gave her a hug, and I said, you know, I'm really sorry. And I, you know, at the time, what I was thinking is, I'm just sorry, you know, it seemed like it started to seem like, this big situation that we were all caught up in. And the only difference, I also realized that really the only difference between her son's death and my mother's death was going to be that she would know when it was going to happen. We didn't know when it was going to happen, but she would know. Someone was still going to take that person's life. And then in the lobby, there was, as we were waiting for the judge to come down, there was one of the jurors walked by and he said, there were several people that were, basically holding out for life in prison, I guess, by not wanting to answer yes to both questions. He says, but I held out for the death penalty because I felt like that was something that you guys deserved. And, at the time, that was gratifying to hear because, again, you've got someone on your side who's looking out for you. And but later when I thought about it, I thought, well, that wasn't really the reason he was supposed to answer yes to either one of those questions. He wasn't supposed to consider us. He was supposed to, consider the actual facts. But I think it's human nature. And to be honest, that's why I sat in that courtroom, partly was so the jurors would see us or see me. So, so time goes on, and I'm, all of those things during the trial are percolating in my mind. I'm thinking about it, and about a year later, I remember I woke up from this dream one morning, and I had a dream that I was at Michael Richards' execution. And I remember, and in my dream, I guess it happened, that he was actually executed. And I remember waking up and feeling really yicky, like, I wanted to die in my dream, and I didn't like the way that made me feel. And I just realized that all this time, support for the death penalty, basically, I was wishing for another human being to die, and I just didn't like the way that made me feel. So I just started to reconsider my support for the death penalty and to think about the impact it was having on me, because what I could see with myself and my siblings is that in order to maintain the support for the death penalty, or this desire to have this sentence carried out, you have to maintain a certain level of anger against this person, because again, if you want, you're basically wanting someone to die, and I think it's hard to wish someone to die if you're not angry with them or feeling some level of hate. So time goes on, and I'm like, I eventually reached the point where I'm against, where I've changed my mind about the death penalty. I'm not for it anymore. But I don't really think too much about this man, Michael Richards, or Richard, I think is how he pronounced his last name. I don't think about forgiveness, or at least, making some sort of effort to reach out and just say, I'm thinking differently about this whole thing. And I retreat one time, and I read about this saint. Her name is Maria Goretti, and she was raped and killed, and before she died, she told the priest that she forgave the man, Alessandro, I forget his last name. Anyway, she said that she forgave him. And I found it in a book of 10 women saints, and her story at the time, because it was right around 1900, and she was really held up as, it wasn't about, her story wasn't really about forgiveness so much as it was about virtue, because I guess I I don't remember the details. I just remember the whole thing that struck me about that story was forgiveness. I mean, I just had this feeling that somehow it was the message that I was supposed to get out of that story. And it was really, to top it all off, it was a silent retreat, and all of a sudden I have these emotions just bubbling up, and I finally had to go to the nun who was running it and say, I know we're not supposed to talk, but let me tell you what just happened to me today. And she said, well, what, it sounds like, you know, forgiveness is really where things are, and why don't you think about that? And so I did. I just finally realized, you know, it wasn't doing me any good to hold in this anger and this hate and this, you know, wishing for this man to die. And so I did eventually get in touch with him and wrote him a letter and told him that I forgave him. We traded a few letters, but you know, it wasn't a big long honest or anything, but it just made me realize that and I didn't know anything about restorative justice. I'd never heard the term. I heard it years later. Someone brought it up to me, and I just realized that I think it's better for your mental health and your emotional stability if you can make that connection and talk to someone, to just connect with them as a human being who's made a tragic and terrible mistake. I mean, that's a big one, and I know it's not easy for people to do, but you know, that was the way it seemed to me. So I'm gonna leave off there because I know we want to have time for questions, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you, Todd, both for your presentations. They have given us much to think about, and we have one question which came in through the Q&A. I've been informed that for some people, at least, the chat is not wanting to work. So if it doesn't work, please use the Q&A. And this is the question: can restorative justice work in families where there is abuse? Generally, the children are taken away until the parents meet the case plan, or it is decided to remove their parental rights. And this person notes the foster care system doesn't seem to work for many of the kids that are taken from their parents.
Wow, that's a big question. That's nothing like jumping in with the hard stuff. That's really tricky when you think about balancing power, working to balance power between a caregiver and a child. And I would hope that there could be an opportunity to address the relational aspect through means of restorative justice at some point, although safety has to be the first concern. And so yes, I think restorative justice can address the situation, but it may not happen in real time while it's taking place. There would be so many factors at play to just kind of give a blanket response to that. But things to consider would be safety, especially for the vulnerable in the setting, and then the power imbalance, and how does one work at creating a more level playing field. Let me just say one more thing. If the person who has, if the adult who has committed the harm admits to it, and is taking responsibility for that action, then maybe that's a case where there could be some movement in that direction. But I would not want to just give a blanket yes to that. But it would certainly be, that would be a hard one to just jump right into. I apologize if that's not a satisfactory response.
Well, and I think, Todd, your answer highlights the reality that when we're talking relational processes, which is somewhat what restorative justice focuses on more, as opposed to what's the punishment going to be, the discrete action against this individual. It's easier to figure out the discrete answer than it is to deal with some of those layered questions about, who's been harmed, what do they need? Because Celeste, you talked about even the difference between where you were with what you needed from the time of the trial till as time goes on and you have more experience and you've had a chance to process. So I don't see it as, being wishy-washy or anything. It's just acknowledging the challenge. And Celeste, when you were talking about the trial and the processing over time, could you speak to ways in which the legal process did address some needs and also the ways it didn't, the needs that you had as a family member, of a murder victim who was deeply loved?
Well, I think that they did tell us that, we did get information about counseling or victim services. I don't think any of us ever used it, mainly because they were in Houston. And although we were in Harris County, we were a good 40 to 45 minutes away from downtown Houston, which I think, I just don't recall us really I know I didn't. I don't think any of my other siblings did, but that was offered as a way to address, the emotional trauma and just as a way to work it through. But I think balanced against that is just this whole adversarial system where everything was presented as black and white, us against them. We're doing this for you against this other person. We're on your side. He has his own side. And there wasn't any thought at all that, maybe we could have some understanding about why he did what he did. That certainly wasn't addressed. I just feel like this whole, the whole, we're just going to get him, kind of attitude that they had, which I think is fairly normal for people on that side of the justice system, is it was unhelpful for me. But then again, I didn't really know what I needed. It's just it's not something that everybody experiences, and hopefully no one experiences it more than once in your life. And so I didn't really know that was unhelpful to me until years later. But I think that, and also this guy had a retrial, and when I reached out to the prosecutor at that time, I was opposed to the death penalty. They didn't seem quite so helpful to me anymore, because I wasn't on board with their agenda. And so, I'm not saying they were rude or mean to me or anything, but there was definitely a chill in the air.
Todd, do you, in your experience with folks who have been victims of harm, particularly violent harm, do you have any observations about how needs over time change?
Yeah, that's a great question. The concern in the early stages is typically, am I safe? And that sense of safety has been, of all of the familiar places, has been taken from from the individual. And so that in itself takes a lot of work and time to get through those questions and that feeling. And once an individual can start to understand, and depending on how long that process takes, if the one who committed the harm is willing to take responsibility for that and is willing to meet with the one they victimized, that can help to restore that sense of safety to the individual. But that can't happen. That has to happen on the time frame of the one who was harmed. They really have to have control of the process, and that's one of those getting a sense of power back. And so as individuals have more experience of having some power, and that starts to build on itself, which then does lead to a greater sense of safety, a greater sense of agency in the process, but just in being in general. And so, yeah, it really has to be, if we're going to use the word victim, it has to really be victim-centered, the whole process. And those needs eventually can shift from fear and need for safety to a sense of a desire for understanding, is where that need will often shift. A desire to understand, to again, part of that safety is, was I targeted? One of those questions, or was I in the wrong place at the wrong time? And so to be able to get an honest response to those questions, all of that starts to create a new sense. You never go back to where you were, but to create a new sense of safety and just being able to move forward in a healthy way. So I'm not sure if, but then everybody's an individual, and so there's no one process of movement that everyone goes through. And so that's kind of a general outline.
And you talked earlier, Todd, about the fact that restorative justice can work along with the traditional criminal justice system, because we understand that, when someone has created great harm, there may well be realities about, public safety that require incarceration for extended periods. And, could you speak more to that concurrent? Because I think what we see now in our criminal justice system is the straight emphasis on the punishment. And so if you were a visionary advising the legislature, I know we have some legislators who are attending tonight, what might that look like? Because we want people to understand the ways in which the current system is failing our murder victim family members and failing the communities and failing the offenders.
Yeah, I know that there is the Kansas Department of Corrections does have a restorative justice office. They have a few staff members who are working in that capacity. And so that's one of those areas where our current system is making room, making space for that process to be, for those methods to be part of a bigger process. If I were talking with a legislator, I would ask, given how long it's been since the use of the death penalty in Kansas, why do we have it as an option? Why is it on the books? And what can we do that, instead of using that as a threat, I mean, I don't know. There's that, it can be a threat, right? And so has that stopped people from committing crimes or harms? I would be interested to see the data on that question, that response. And then how has the death penalty created closure for victims, family of victims, or those who have been victimized by that kind of a crime? And if it has created closure, there are just as many possibilities for closure in other ways, and that's without cutting off those other possibilities by the means of the death penalty. So I guess it's kind of a pragmatic question, and then it's imagining the good that can come. And so since we're not currently enacting the death penalty for a long time in Kansas, then let's use the tools of restorative justice to address the harms, to give people a chance. It takes coaching, it takes work on both sides, but to make it broadly known that this is a possibility, and that yes, the victim has to request it, but if the perpetrator is requesting this without the victim also, then let's utilize what is available in a restorative justice model to help that perpetrator make progress in their own right, in terms of taking responsibility for what they did, using other panels of people to help fill in the voice of the victim if that person's not willing to come to the table. And yeah, I does that give you a sense of?
It does. It does. Thank you, Todd. And Celeste, if you had an opportunity to say to the legislators, because as you know, it's a journey that changes over time and you have new insights. What new insights do you have for the legislature?
Well, that's a good one. Well, first, I do want to say the anecdote, if you're talking about, does the death penalty prevent crime? Harris County, at the time that my mom was killed, had one of the highest murder rates in Texas, and so obviously it wasn't really helping that much. But I think I think that prosecutors, I don't know if this is necessarily helpful to the legislature, but I think the prosecutors ought to listen to family members if they say, they're not for the death penalty, and at least give them some, discuss it with them, and, not be so quick to use as, well, I just think it shouldn't. I mean, at the time, it's just such a hard. It's a hard journey, and I have to say, just based on my own experience, you just can't really think straight about what you need and what you want and what this punishment means for you in your own journey. And I think part of that is, it took me years, and so you have to balance that against the reality that, if they catch someone, they need a quick trial, and so, you can't always have those insights between the time they catch them and the time they go to trial. And so I would just say, if the death penalty wasn't on the table, it might be more helpful. That's what I would say. Just because, once that sentence is passed, there's nothing you can do about it, and people need time to process this. And if you have life, I understand that, the reality is most people in Kansas, Kansas hasn't, even in Texas, it took 20 years at least. I forget the the amount of time, but it was a long time. So, you know, the reality is that there is, I mean, I guess technically there is that time for the process, but that still means that sooner or later that person may end up being killed by the state. And, you know, if part of your journey is to not want that, I just think if it were off the table, it would be more helpful. I also think that just having it on the table tends to direct a lot of family towards anger and hard feelings. And that doesn't help with the healing process at all.
Well, thank you, Celeste, for sharing your journey and for reflecting with us, you know, kind of how things changed for you over time, the challenges that are out there. Because, you know, I've learned from other murder victim family members that anniversaries come, different things come, and it reminds you of the loved one that you've lost. And so it continues to be there as a journey. And then Todd, thank you for helping us unpack the concept of restorative justice a little bit more. It's not something that is always talked about, and it brings to light some important considerations, because when a crime is committed, it's not just about what happens to the offender, because there's the needs of the victim if they're still living, the victim's family if the victim is deceased, and there's the needs of the community, because as we all know, violent crime can be very traumatic for communities and destroy their own sense of safety. And so both of you have really helped us understand ways in which the current system, with its focus solely on punishment or very heavily on punishment, fails us. And that's an important consideration for us in Kansas as we look at ways in which to respond to the unfortunate reality of homicide. I would like to thank the folks who joined us this evening, and I would like to invite you to join us on Saturday, November the 11th at 1 p.m. in Wichita, when we will have our annual meeting and our abolition conference. And the theme that day is Confronting Crime, Open Discussions on Public Safety and Capital Punishment. The location is going to be Fireworks, which is a location at 500 South Topeka, which those of you in Wichita, I believe, probably are familiar with. Our speakers are Demetrius Minor of Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, Dalton Glasscock of Wichita, who is active in Republican politics, and Michael Berzer, who is a criminologist who has studied many aspects about deterrence, crime, the death penalty, and has a background himself as a law enforcement officer. And we will have more information soon on our website and our Facebook page about how to register for that event. Thank you very much for being here tonight, and have a great evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.